To go on with the panel, I obviously need to invite the panelists. So I'll start with Carolyn Chin-Parry, the MD and Digital Accelerator Leader for PwC. Carolyn wears multiple hats. Why don't you join me, Carolyn? She wears multiple hats, but across the session, we let her wear some of them. But I would really like to take the opportunity to congratulate Carolyn for receiving the Woman of the Year Award for 2019 in the Asian chapter of Women in IT. So please join me in congratulating her. Next, we have Gaurav Modi, MD for Southeast Asia, Hong Kong and Taiwan for Capgemini. Gaurav is no stranger in this region, and he's got his unique entrepreneurial skills that he brings to Capgemini. He's worked there for 9 years, and Capgemini, as you know, is one of the fastest growing consulting firms in this region. Welcome, Gaurav. And then we have SGInnovate's own Suchitra Narayan, who I'm sure many of you out here know. Suchitra brings her expertise as a long-time tech industry analyst to help the vibrant startup ecosystem here in Singapore. And on a very personal note, I've had the pleasure of being a colleague and having learned a lot from her technology insights over the years. And finally, let's welcome Ecosystem Principal Advisor Tim Sheedy back on stage. We'll just get you to work a little more while we have you here. So, all right. So to begin with, let's just finish off some of the conversations around cybersecurity and AI. And before we go on to talking more about transformation, because it would be a shame not to talk about digital transformation given the expertise of especially two of our panelists here. And then we'll also talk about the implications for the startup and the innovator community later on. I'll start with you, Carolyn, just because you're sitting right next to me. One of the hats that you wear is being the vice chair for Auscham's Digital and Cyber Committee. So, and we've heard Alex's presentation, and Alex has been talking about the technologies that are there. We've been talking about the managed security service providers that are there in the market. So it's not that the technology is not there. So why is it that organizations keep facing this this challenge in implementing consistent cybersecurity measures?
I think, in my opinion, what I have observed is there's lots of technological solutions out there in the security space, but what's really challenging is actually the human factor. In reality, even if you have unlimited budget, which is unusual and never really happens around security, in reality, it's the everyday person in the workforce that can actually really open up the highest amount of risk in that space. So I think being able to train people up on being cyber savvy is something that's really important. I think organizations try their best to do it, however, it doesn't always really stick. And I guess all you really need is someone to be really callous for something to really open up in a very, risky way.
Right. Okay, so it's interesting that you should say so. Given that this is most of you are involved in deep tech, so it's not always about the technology. Sometimes it can very well be about people. So Tim, thank you for sharing your predictions for AI earlier. And one of the areas that we have not discussed today, especially because Randeep, our Cities of the Future expert, is not here, is the growing role of AI in smart city initiatives. We have intelligent infrastructure, we have smart energy, we have smart mobility, public safety especially. So just going back to the people context that Carolyn provided, do you think that ethical factors and the people, issues around people would actually be a hindrance to large-scale AI adoption in governments?
Yeah, the smart city space is an interesting one, and smart economies like here in Singapore. There's often a lot more talk and promise than is actually delivered. Often there are some significant budgeting challenges of working cross agencies, cross levels of government, etc., which actually mean that the best intentions never happen. Actually, a good example of this is in Queensland. The Queensland motorway worked out that if they spent a couple of $100 million, they could make their motorway smart and increase the capacity by 40%. Instead, they worked out that the government could get more votes by spending $3 billion and in putting a new lane on each way, and increasing the capacity by 30%. So, winning votes is important, but what's stopping the AI initiatives in my experience so far is this question of data security. So I guess bringing the two themes of today together around AI and security is that there is a general lack of trust in our government's ability to secure our data, right? And that's ultimately what our concern is. Alex talked a lot about data privacy, right? And look, and I know Singapore's a little different. I know Singapore, you have a good government, perhaps, you run like a proper business, right? Whereas in Australia and in nearly every other economy, the security person in that department was hired at the lowest possible cost, right? And we're relying on them to secure our data. So there's this question of, do we actually have the policies, the capabilities, the technologies, the procedures, the people in place to be able to secure the data that makes our systems intelligent? And I think, we know that a lot of the time the answer to that is no. Governments are getting, hacked as often, if not more often, than private sector organisations. And so therefore, it's these governments that are collecting data, trying to do intelligent things with it, that aren't securing that data very well. Again, I had a personal experience with the Australian Tax Office when I was, a couple of years ago, I was speaking. I rang them and they automatically did do you want to register your voice? So your voice is your passport, basically your voice is your ID. And I went, oh yeah, that makes it easy. And I went through this process, took a few minutes, and then afterwards I went, oh my God, I've just given my voice ID to an organisation I know is highly insecure, right? And if your password fails, gets hacked, you can change your password. I can't change my voice. So I think that's one of the things that's stopping. So governments having great ideas, and then they go into committees and they go into working groups, and these are the discussions that stop these great AI initiatives from happening in cities. I know, look, if you're in China, it just happens, and you don't have anyone saying no to the things because a single body makes the decisions. But in democracies, we are seeing that smart government and smart cities is happening much slower because of the concerns of citizens.
Like San Francisco, banning the use of facial recognition.
Exactly right. Yeah.
And New York following suit, right? So things like that would happen as well. Okay, so now let's shift the focus a little bit and talk a little more holistically about digital transformation. And we have, of course, two experts here. Gaurav, I will come to you, but I have one question for Carolyn before I go on. So again, the way I asked you about the challenges for cybersecurity, in your experience in implementing digital transformation, like organizations that implement digital transformation programs and on their journeys, what challenges do they mostly face?
Actually, quite a few challenges, but I'll try to keep it short. The first, I think, is really very much on people actually thinking that digital transformation is about technology when it really isn't. Digital transformation is actually about people and how you can actually make work faster, better, cheaper, And on top of that, one of the main challenges I see is actually around change management, whereby we spend so much time and money focusing on technology, but in reality, the true challenge about digital transformation is actually about the mindset, the user adoption, people wanting to use technology and learn new skills. And I think it's that human factor that makes it very challenging. So while people might think about digital transformation surrounding new technologies, which is true, in reality, why it usually fails is actually usually the human factor side of it, whereby organizations are finding it really hard to get people to change the way they do work, to be able to get them into training sessions to learn things differently and to make that really stick in the long term. So the user embedment is really very challenging.
Right. So when we were having a conversation backstage, you said something about, executive management buy-in, senior management buy-in, and what it essentially means is for many organizations, it's just getting the budget. But you said that it's way more than just the budget. Senior management should actually believe that the transformation journey will help the organization
Absolutely.
and help create the roadmap, right?
Yes, absolutely. Because in reality, there's no point in the generals telling the team what to do if they themselves don't believe in it and practice it. And in reality, most people are quite savvy as to what the senior managers or CEOs are like. And I think one of the success stories is actually, as you all know, DBS, whereby the CEO is the one leading the charge, setting the scene, putting a lot of time and money, not just in technology, but also in change management, making sure they have the right agile coaches, to the point that he wanted the whole organization to be agile. And he himself actually brought the agile mindset into the ExCo meetings, which is very unusual. But it just shows the level of dedication that they're prepared to do to change the top levels as well as every other level below there. And what I try to find when you look at digital transformation going wrong is you see a distinct, gap between what happens at the top versus what happens in the middle and lower layers. Sometimes the top will say, yes, we really want to do digital transformation and here's the budget, go away and do it. But they don't practice it, they don't believe in it, they think it's everyone else's problem to go and fix it and to execute it. And what you then see is everybody else, all the employees, being very disenchanted because all of a sudden they are working really long hours. And I think one of the issues with digital transformation is that the budgets are usually so tight that people will have to do their normal BAU roles, and over on top of that, then work on transformation projects. So your team already starts getting very burnout, and they would actually dislike the transformation project before they even started because they're not seeing their families for dinner anymore.
It's not a good way to start, is it? Gaurav, I promised I'll come to you soon. I'm going to ask you the same question, but with a twist. So many organizations have failed in their digital transformation journeys, and that's a fact, right? And you are one of those organizations who's helping these people succeed. So as a tech vendor, what are your major challenges, when implementing digital transformation for your clients?
Right. So actually, I kind of echo your thoughts, Caroline. I'll just probably take it a step up. So typically, when we engage with organizations, let's look at two facets in terms of capability. One is the tech capability, and second is the leadership capability. We did a survey with 1,000 plus organizations in 2012, and we repeated it late last year. Let's look at the tech capability and split into two parts, which is experimentation and technology, and kind of using the technology for business benefits. Split into two parts: front end of the business, what you can refer to as customer experience, and back end of the business, which is, say, operations in a way. In the 6 years, the amount of money which has been spent and the benefits which customers have been able to get in customer experience largely remain the same. In operations, it has gone down, because customers find it increasingly painful to do back-end transformation. Now think about customer experience. You cannot have a seamless customer experience till the time your back-end is sorted, right? And the CEOs are worried because every CEO knows that, the moment they decide to go with a $150 million program to change their back-end, there is a high probability that they're going to lose their jobs, right? So there is an element of transformation which is missing on the tech capability part. Comparing this survey, the confidence of organizations in terms of tech leadership having the skill sets across both customer experience and operations has largely remained the same. I come to the second part, which is a leadership capability. In 6 years, the leadership capability has gone down from almost 43% to 33%, which means people are far less confident that they have the ability, they have the people, they have the operating model, they have a shared vision, they have the relationships between business and technology to be able to successfully deliver a transformation program. That's where the big challenge comes, which is what Caroline said. It's about people. Somebody sets up a vision. People are not, even the leadership teams are not able to take the whole organizations together on a journey. You cannot do digital by giving the budget to 50 people, hiring a technology vendor who's going to bring additional 100 people and say, all right, I'm going to change or I'm going to digitally transform. So there is an absolute lack of clarity there or a true intent from the leadership teams to do it. I think third part, and I think which we kind of heard this morning at President Obama's speech as well. For you to be able to change, you need to change at the top. How many boards within Asia Pac have been able to bring in the change? The average age of boards in Asia Pac still is 60 plus, and you're talking about dealing with the millennials. You cannot understand their mindset. How many have been able to change in terms of the diversity of leadership, the diversity of thought in their boards? So till the time all those things happen, transformation is going to be a painful exercise, which customers would have to go through, and the organizations which have been able to push through. You gave the example of DBS, wonderful case. It has been driven from the top. We work with organizations like Daimler. Even somebody who is an accounts payable employee, he is going through agile training. That's the level of intensity you need to push in terms of an organization's ability to successfully transform. So the challenges are large, not so much on technology. Skill sets are scarce, but still can be trained, uplifted. Challenges more in terms of people, leadership, culture, ability to get your team together.
Right. And in the end, I suppose systems integrators and consulting firms will do really well in bringing it all together. Yeah, good for your business. Yeah. Anyway, so one last question to you, Carolyn, and before I move on to Suchitra. So let's talk about innovation for a bit. So every corporate worth its salt today, they have an innovation center, right? Many of those organizations actually have organization-wide innovation KPIs. So why is it that they still need to engage with the startup and innovator community? Why is it that many of these innovation centers do not really succeed? So what is it that the startup community, the individual innovators, what value do they bring to the ecosystem?
With startups, I would say that the ones that tend to do well and are successful, they have already identified niches in the market that the traditional players are not playing in. We have seen that with the insurance, such as Ping An. We've seen it with, say, My Bank from Jack Ma as well, whereby he was able to then expand on this online bank, which has really taken over China because he's noticed that all the traditional banking players were not able to lend money to the everyday person who wants to set up a small business. And he does that through technology by looking at 5,000 data points to then ascertain the risk profile of that particular organization or person. None of the banks were doing that, and now he's making so much money from it. And what I'm trying to say here is use that example whereby a lot of traditional players are used to doing things their own selves. And because they're so used to business as usual or doing incremental steps with their transformation, they can't always see life outside of where they live. And hence it does take people who are fairly astute, who may be familiar with the industry, to be able to then go, okay, this is an area that they're not doing well in or not doing at all, and this is how we think we can take over it. And answering the earlier question around innovation and why some innovation labs don't work, I think we've seen many organizations, especially the financial services such as insurance and banking, about 5 to 7 years ago, set up innovation labs. And they were terribly arrogant towards consulting firms and other vendors because they thought they could do everything themselves. And in the end, after 2 years, a lot of them shut down because there's no return on investment. And the reason why there's no ROI, there's a few reasons. One of it is because the innovation labs were set up as a silo. Now, why would you set up something as a silo when you want to integrate that innovation into all parts of the business? Right. Secondly, it depends on the type of people that we hire into the innovation labs. A lot of times they are very highly skilled, so there's nothing wrong there. However, they may not understand the culture of the organization or the true challenges on the business as usual part to be able to integrate the true innovation into the true pain points in those organizations. So I'd say that it's actually quite a few factors around it. And I think this is where the startups can actually really thrive. And also, I think startups don't actually have the same rigor and bureaucratic nature as the larger players. All they really need is 1 or 2 really good backers financially for them to do what they need to do, and they don't have to jump over hoops, lots of gateways. They don't have to write business cases and go through all those kind of bureaucratic, expected behaviors required in the larger organizations. So they can actually move a lot faster and cheaper and better.
Right. So the agility. So now that we've heard from Carolyn about the relevance of the startup ecosystem, Suchitra, Singapore has emerged quite the hub for innovation, and especially in deep tech, and organizations like SGInnovate has got a huge role to play in incubating it. So in your experience in helping them, which are the technology and the industry areas that you see a lot of innovation happening? Where do you think the innovation will happen in the next year or so?
So one caveat before I answer the question is we are looking at it from a venture capital standpoint. I think we've represented the corporate standpoint here and an analyst standpoint. So the venture capital is a little bit different because we are looking at futuristic, disruptive technologies. So that's the caveat. Given that, I think we're looking very much at solving for global issues and concerns that everybody should be aware of. Clean tech, food tech, agri-tech, energy. These are things that we're always looking to see new and disruptive ideas in. Quantum, that's another space that we've made quite a few recent investments in. I think both from the perspective of security in the future, as well as obviously higher processing capability and supercomputing. Another one is autonomous everything. I say autonomous everything because sort of autonomous vehicles, they fit into a broader robotics spectrum, so to speak. And automation has been around for a very long time from the robotics standpoint. But if you look at even robotics, they just use vision right now, but getting human senses is something that we will start to see moving forward, but autonomous vehicles would be augmented with that as well. And finally, healthcare and medtech, bringing solutions that use AI, ML into day-to-day life for predictive. We've got companies in our portfolio that are used to predict cancer markers, for predicting strokes. There's one that actually can predict the occurrence of a cardiac instance about a couple of weeks before it happens. So things that would help with the global aging population. I mean, globally we are aging, and we need to figure out solutions for predictive maintenance of humans. Yeah.
I always get very enthused when healthcare is mentioned, and because I wrote the health tech report as well, the Predicts report, I'll take the opportunity, just talk a little bit about health tech and stop being a moderator for a bit. So in the healthcare space, I see innovation in three different buckets. There is the scientific-based innovations around genomics and all of that Suchitra was saying. But then there is also the emerging technology adoption like AI, machine learning within the organizations, within healthcare provider organizations, hospitals, that actually help with the care outcome. And then I also see innovation in business models. There are different healthcare organizations. For example, a few years back in Australia, public hospitals started private wings to increase their capability of providing care. So there's a constant change for that. But the biggest trend that I expect to see in 2020 for healthcare is that the healthcare industry will finally start learning from other industries. They will no longer go for the CIO and the CTO who's got 25 years of experience in the healthcare industry. They will look for the CIO and the CTO who has got experience in retail industry or hospitality or the financial services industry. And I do think that healthcare has got a lot to learn from fintech, when it comes to inclusion, and as well as how they kind of helped the banking industry improve their customer outcomes. So just a little bit of, aside on healthcare, and I go back to being a moderator now. And back to you, Suchi, again, for your next question. I just mentioned fintech, and we've seen several of the early fintech organizations. They failed, right? They did make an impact, they did disrupt the industry, but they failed. And I personally think that they failed because many of them pursued something like innovation for, innovation's sake. They just innovated. They didn't really address a real problem statement. They didn't really, have true understanding of the financial services industry. They knew the technology. So at SGInnovate, or in your experience, how do you help startups actually, not avoid this pitfall?
So there's two parts to that question, right?
She speaks like a true analyst. There's two parts.
There's two parts. One is that we invest in very, very early stage startups. So we are banking on disruptive technologies. And to give the analogy, Ford made the statement, if you actually go back to your customers and always ask the customers what do they want, in the late 1800s, they would have said, I want a faster horse. But he built the motor car, right? So sometimes product can lead market. I don't necessarily believe that it always has to be market-led. Now, market-led is much easier in a B2C context. So obviously, I can go from 1 user today to 1 million users tomorrow. But from a B2B context, it's much harder to be product-led. It's much easier to be market-led. But I would say that if you're market-led, it's unlikely that you're truly disruptive and that you're doing something different. So we do place our bets on founders, very early stage technologies that are at the cutting edge of technology. They're taking risks, they're moonshots. Not all of them, but some of them certainly are moonshots. But they're working for the greater global good. And how do we help them? I suppose we do venture building. So we build out ventures from grounds up. If we think something is a good idea and the founders have a solid technology background, we will support them in building out their business cases and connecting them to advisors, to mentors, not just in Singapore, but globally, as well as, of course, we want to take equity stake and help them with their fundraise as well. So many ways that we would support them. But yeah, there are two parts to it. One is product-led innovation and the other is market-led innovation.
Right. So I would say the startups and the innovator, the entire ecosystem out there, they would do well to align themselves to a larger ecosystem. Something like SGInnovate also gives them the opportunity, but also large corporates as well, right? And many of them have succeeded because of their affiliations to larger corporates as well. So Gaurav, this one's for you. How do you see these large corporates engaging with the startup and the innovator community? How do you see them doing it now? And how do you think it's going to change in the future, in the near future, maybe?
Sure. So again, I think there are two parts to it. We're all analysts, I guess. So the first part is that there is a difference in being an investor and an operator. The mindset is very different. So Capgemini, we play on both sides. We have Capgemini Ventures, which essentially focuses on early stage startups in which Capgemini would put in money. But I think we've learned that putting money and managing it as an investor is not exactly the same as, using them as an operator. So as an operator, what we do is that Capgemini established what we term as applied innovation exchanges. We have around 11 across the globe in different parts, in San Francisco, in Paris, in Mumbai, in Singapore, in Melbourne, and a few other places. The job of these applied innovation exchanges is to deeply embed ourselves into the local ecosystem. And in each market or in each area we have this ecosystem. We've typically seen that, like the ones in Germany, there is a lot of innovative stuff happening around auto sector. The one in France we have in Lille is a lot of innovation happening around the retail sector. We have one which is a flagship in San Francisco. It's kind of cross and AI and security in many other areas. So as an operator, what we do is that our job is to stay embedded, first of all, in that ecosystem and make sure we bring that ecosystem to our large customers. When we bring them to large customers, the first part is that we are exposing them to the customers and customers getting kind of exposed to them to see these are the possibilities. We don't necessarily play our part to say that we have to be a party to the transactions. These transactions could be directly between the startup and between the kind of end customer. In some cases, after the initial prototypes are successful or the customer is okay, you have to industrialize that thing at a large scale with the customer, which requires substantial amount of integrations, which requires substantial amount of operating model change or cultural change, which kind of needs to be brought up at the customer place. That's a part which we play to kind of make sure that we are able to educate the startup in terms of how it is going to get industrialized at a scale with the customer. What are the capabilities you need to build up? How we can help you support it? That's one part. We have also seen that although customers could be happy with the initial prototypes which they do with these startups, sometimes there is a nervousness because in these startups are sometimes 10 people, 15 people organizations. There is a nervousness about what happens if these guys don't exist. What happens to the IP, which I'm going to put into my core systems. So Capgemini plays a part in terms of being an orchestrator to mitigate the risk on both sides. Sometimes we do that by becoming an investor, or sometimes we kind of manage that by becoming more of a risk manager for the customer by putting appropriate clauses which benefit both sides to manage that process. So we are doing it quite I think, strongly in terms of getting into that embedded part. And I think this was the last point. The KPIs of our applied innovation exchange, we are not measuring it in terms of how much revenue or profitability they are generating. We are actually measuring, what innovative solutions they have been able to bring up to the customers. What value has the customer been able to generate by leveraging those innovations? So it's not internally focused, it's completely externally focused. The people who had these AIs are measured on that dimension rather than internal dimension.
That's interesting. We have a few questions according to Slido, but before we move to the Q&A section, Tim, I wanted to just ask you one last question about your prediction, a little bit about your prediction, that is. You said that an automation would be like the shortcut to AI adoption in organization, shortcut for want of better words. And I'm sure there are several members in the audience out here, both startups, innovators, SMEs, who are working on automation solutions. In our ecosystem AI study, when we asked what kind of vendors do you engage with for your robotic process automation solutions, we got a certain set of vendors. And then when we asked them what kind of vendors do you associate with, what do you engage with when you do smart process automation, right, inbuilt machine learning, we got a different set of vendors. Just like your comment on that, like why this difference? And I think that it's an important lesson for the audience out here. There's a lesson right there. Like people do engage with two different set of vendors as their automation solution becomes more complicated and complex.
Yeah, so I think the simplest answer to this is what's happening in the market is that and this is quite a strange happening because AI is. I know we were talking about security earlier, right? And they're talking about the consolidation of the market, and there's hundreds or thousands of vendors, and then it consolidates down to 20 or 30, and then down to 5 or 10 over a 10, 15-year period. Here we are at the beginning of AI, and it's already come down to 4 vendors. It's Microsoft, Azure, AWS, Google, and IBM. The big cloud platforms are the big AI platforms today. Most software firms are stopping, no longer building their own machine learning tools and capabilities. They are themselves leveraging the particular capabilities in the cloud because they're just better and cheaper and faster and more reliable and easy to access. And I mentioned in the predictions that they're getting easier and easier to access these capabilities. But if you look at RPA and automation, it actually came from the service providers themselves. A lot of the Indian service providers, the way they made money out of their contracts was by using automation tools that they wrote themselves. So they have a lot of their own tools. One of the fastest emerging automation tools at the moment is actually a tool that was developed by one of the large global SIs. The RPA space has come from this very fragmented, lots of different companies implementing a solution, one that will scour websites for prices for your competitors so you can always match their prices, another tool that will help something in your call center happen faster, etc. Whereas, and all those companies are talking about making their products smart and they're trying to add machine learning into them. But the reality is that their clients aren't hearing that message. Their clients are thinking, if I want machine learning, I'm going to go to my core machine learning platform, which is AWS or IBM or one of the key ones. A lot of that's because that's where their data sits. And AI is about data. It's about big data sets and doing lots of learning and constant learning. And you don't want to be constantly moving your data around to different applications to do learning. So your RPA tool in the IT team, needs this data that you have to move across constantly, and then you have to move the data across to your call center RPA tool, etc. You want all your data to remain in a single place and do the learning on it and develop your algorithms from there. So that's where we see it going. And as I said, it is surprising that the market has consolidated to these big four vendors so early with the penetration rate at 10%, 15%. But there it is.
So thank you for that. I'll move on to some of the questions. I do have a couple more questions for the panelists. I'll leave that for the last. Let me see. Suchitra, let me see. Maybe you can address this. What do you think is the biggest opportunity for blockchain? And, what is how are you seeing the blockchain space develop in Singapore?
Again, going back to, I suppose, when you look at solving for bigger global issues, we have investments in an organization that looks at ensuring that fundraise goes to the right refugees when we raise funds, right? Again, enabled via blockchain. Another solution is in agri-tech, where we are able to trace back exactly to which orchard a particular fruit came from. Now, imagine the instances of an outbreak of a bacteria, or like we've had in Australia, the needles in the strawberries or whatever else it might be. You're able to trace it back rather quickly and figure out what was the supply chain, what did it look like, and then identify where the problem points are. So certainly that is something that we have looked at, and it's something that we've made investments in. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I can't see very well without my glasses. With my glasses, sorry. Yeah. Carolyn, I think this one's more the best suited for you. How do we influence human behavior to be more data and cyber savvy? I'm sorry.
Very tricky question. I think that there's general training that needs to be done. I think that also needs to be reminders. So, for example, in common areas such as your pantry or even your bathrooms, to have little stickers that remind you of different scenarios where, there are cyber opportunities for breaches. May it be, phishing, or may it be ransomware and so on. But to actually just have something that's quite graphic that helps people to remember is useful. But I think more importantly, to actually be able to influence people in terms of the culture. And when I say this, I mean every employee should feel that they can be able to contact IT in an efficient manner whenever they think that there's something that doesn't look quite right, or they feel like they need to double check something, such as an attachment, for example. And for that culture to be such a safe place that this can be done as frequently as needed, hopefully not all the time and every time, but a safe culture where people can feel that, I'm not sure about this attachment, or I'm not sure about this particular file, to be able to contact the right people to say, hey, can you just check this for me? And if it's just a false alert, so be it, let's not penalize this person. But to create that safe culture where there's a closer relationship between, the average employee versus people who are the experts in this area. And quite often, I think people are a little bit nervous to go, I'm not really sure if I should pass this on to IT and so on. I'll just open it anyway. And I think that's where the issue sits, which is that slight fear of being, negatively thought of when you do that. So I think it's both ways. One is, at the top where you try to educate people, and I think it's also at the bottom layer at the operational side. Yeah.
I'll give this one to you, Gaurav. There seems to be quite a few data scientists in the audience, because there seems to be very concerned questions from the data scientists out there. So it says that, companies like Microsoft and... Sorry, that's not the one. Okay, you said, hang on a second. Yeah, so basically, Tim said something in his presentation which says that data scientists, their roles may not be the way it is envisioned today. So quite a few SOS kind of questions saying that where would the data scientists go? How is their role going to change? Where do you see that? Especially in an organization like yours.
See, I have a slightly different view on the AI side. I think one of the biggest obstacles to large customers moving on to the AI side is data. They don't have the right data in place yet. Take a few examples. Take the case of a telecom company. Every telco company wants to come out with billing plans which are as personalized to each individual as they can be and generated on the fly. If you look through the systems, in their existing billing systems, where do their billing plans reside? They are in old XML files or maybe in Excel files in their legacy billing systems, and they haven't changed their billing plans for the last 10 years, or they've just kept on adding. So there are maybe 2,000 to 3,000 plus billing plans which are residing there. And 1 million consumers in all those different billing plans. Now you tell them that I want to come out with an AI engine which is going to address a specific need for a segment. Forget about each customer, a segment of customers. They need to understand their billing plans first. They need to rationalize their billing plans first. They need to figure out the data flow of how I need to get an outcome of giving you a specific billing plan. And that takes time, that takes effort, and that cuts across the enterprise. So 70 to 80% of the effort initially for an AI program has to go into understanding data. So with us, the challenge is that customers come to us and say, I'm thinking of initiating an AI program. I want to automate and have the bots and intelligence in my front-ending customer systems. This is okay. Let's start talking about it. You know your data? I think I do. I have the technology systems in place. I have an SAP running, Oracle running, since these are systems. So I think I have the data. No, you don't have the data. You're going to take a year to first understand the data, and then you start to build algorithms on top of it. I think that's probably the first part of it. Data scientists come after that. Right. So is there an opportunity or is there a big demand for data scientists? The answer is yes, of course, yes. But right now, those data scientists also are spending a fair bit of time understanding data so that when you start to build the algorithms, it's easier for you to put a context to which data you're using for what kind of an algorithm. I think that's probably, one part.
Can I just wanted to add to that, even with our startups, when we introduce them to corporates, I think that is a big stumbling block, because the corporates come back and say, we've got a ton of data. Actually, you don't have data, you've just got information. And there's a big difference between having data and having information. And I think those two terms are, misused quite a lot, which results in stepping back and saying, okay, how do I translate this information to convert into data which makes sense? And then you can deploy AI systems or whatever. Yeah.
Maybe this last point on that, it's an interesting topic. Some of the best customers you may look at, the ones we use in our day-to-day lives, you may call them absolutely at the top end of the digital chain or digital maturity chain. They don't know who their customers are. I've been in Singapore for 11 years now. My mortgage is with somebody, my salary account is with somebody else, my car loan is with somebody else, and no, they don't understand, where the actual customer is. And we're talking about people who have tons of money to spend. People have a huge reputation to attract and train a lot of people, but they haven't been able to use it.
So I agree with you. And I think one of the exciting opportunities for data scientists is to actually get away from that humdrum stuff. Like the idea of applications becoming smarter. At the moment, we're using our data scientists to work on processes in the financial system to make it 3 clicks instead of 10 clicks to make that invoice, or automated. That's not stuff that differentiates our business, right? It saves us some money, yeah, absolutely, but it doesn't differentiate us. And I think this is where, even using that billing system example, Now, our billing systems today are dumb, and they're not, they don't automate much. But I believe the next generations will become smart, and they'll tell us what the new bill, how we should bill more effectively, and that customer, should go on this billing, style instead of that one, right? And that again, but that's when everyone's doing that, that's no longer a competitive advantage. That again frees up the data scientists to work on really the moonshots, the big things that are really differentiate our businesses or your clients' businesses. That's where I see the huge opportunity going forward, and that's where the high value is. And that's I hear a lot of companies complain about the cost of data scientists. I'm not sure what the average data science salary is here, but there's a growing expectation that a data scientist doesn't just have a degree, but they have 10 or 15 years business experience too, right? And so that makes that person pretty senior, pretty expensive, right? So you want them working on really good things, not making it easier to invoice a customer to save a few steps in the process, which is where we're sort of wasting a lot of their time today.
So I'll take one for the team. There's one which says, what do you think about remote patient monitoring? Is it going to be a big hit soon? Remote patient monitoring is happening in a big way. In the hospitals, when the clinician is not there, the clinician is having dinner at home, they can access. It's happening in hospitals across the world. It's happening in health systems across the world. The question, I think, is more about when home-based care would take over, when you'd actually be able to provide healthcare for patients who are away from the hospital. From the technology standpoint, there is no issues with that whatsoever. The technology to provide remote healthcare within the hospital and the technology to provide remote healthcare outside the walls of the hospital is exactly the same. No difference there. Of course, there is a little more reliance on network. There's a little more reliance on your security and how you are going to be able to secure your own apps. But the problem is essentially a policy problem. In many, many countries, they have problems with actually who's going to monetize it, what are the regulatory, what are the compliance issues. Suppose you are providing remote healthcare, suppose the patient dies, who is liable for it? Will the insurance cover it? So as far as I'm concerned, remote healthcare is very much happening there. It's been happening for the last 4-5 years, but the policies around it have not changed largely, especially in emerging economies.
And can I also add to that? You're absolutely right that the question of funding is a big one. I've seen it take off. Remote monitoring is taking off in countries where there's a single health system,
yes,
where it's provided, where there are multiple, where there's public and private. My private insurer would probably rather I die of a heart attack and have no costs, right? Or me going to the public system, right? I have a heart attack, I go into the public system, and they don't have any cost at all, right? So they could be monitoring going, oh God, this guy's going to have a heart attack. Let's not tell anyone. and they're financially incented to do that, right?
And
so that's a big problem in many economies in the US, the UK, etc.
So that's what I'm saying. It's there in a country like Australia with the nationalized healthcare system, and there are many that don't have that, so it's obviously much tougher. Okay, so thank you very much for your questions, and I apologize if I couldn't address all of them. We are kind of running out of time, but I thought that would be an absolute shame to have 3 experts here. Tim already got his say with his predictions. We have 3 experts from the industry here. It would be an absolute shame not to get their predictions for 2020 while we have them here. So I'll start with you, Carolyn. What do you predict for the technology space in 2020? Top 3, whichever.
Asia being the battleground for digital banking.
Okay.
China leading the way in AI and crypto.
Okay.
And much deeper collaboration between HR and tech teams. The reason being that we really need to think about what human augmentation in the workplace looks like and what the future of work looks like. And the future of work isn't about the future, it's actually about right now.
Right. Actually, Tim has written our predicts document for 2020 on workplace of the future, and he does cover that as well. So yeah, good. It completely syncs. Gaurav, your tech predictions for 2020?
Investments in customer experience would continue to go up. Massive, I think. Hyper automation would lead to specific segments around AI. And AI is where the back office transformation would happen because customers are worried about spending too much money on that.
Right.
So hyper automation in the back end, leveraging AI, and hence moving towards kind of a seamless customer experience. And multi-cloud, which is already happening, I would say that it would pick up even more pace with customers kind of, having the platforms to move their workloads across multiple clouds.
Right. Okay. And Suchi, I'll kind of twist it around a little bit for you. Your top predictions for 2020 for the SME startup space, not necessarily from the tech domain.
Yeah, I'll talk about it sort of as the investment areas that we
Sure.
look at and that we see coming up for 2020. What we do see is everything from a perspective of citizen, but as well as infrastructure, digital security. I think we have IoT sensors with cybersecurity. I think that's definitely one area we'll be looking at. Another is from a healthcare and medtech standpoint. One is any solution that uses AI, ML to help democratize and bring healthcare to the hands of mass citizens, not just the elite. So lower cost in an ideal manner. And the second one as well is chronic disease management. Bringing in chronic diseases, we are an aging population globally. So to take it away from the hospitals and bring that back into your homes and home care management with deep tech solutions, that's something that I think would be really interesting for 2020. As well as automation. I think automation as we know it from a perspective of physical robots. Every time we talk about robots, people have these two images that pop up in your mind. One is the cute little robots like the Peppers of the world that walk around and bring you your towels in a Japanese hotel, or they have the Transformer version, which is out there killing everybody and destroying the world, right? But I think it's something much more practical. It's going to be something that augments humans, and almost to your point of data scientists, frees up the human mind to do more creative, to do higher level thinking jobs while you start to automate the lower end of jobs, whether it's through, right now there's vision, but imagine robots with a sense of touch, with a sense of taste, with a sense of, hearing that react rather quickly, that can prepare your food for you in an old age home or whatever else, or a brain-computer interface which helps people with prosthetics to feel. I think that's something we are certainly interested to look at.
Wonderful, a wonderful way to. We end on a note of hope, actually, almost. With that, I end this panel, and you're free to enjoy drinks under the Christmas tree now. Thank you very much to our panelists.